If somehow you couldn't already tell, I really love cars. In fact, I've always loved cars. My parents and even grandparents tell me stories about how when I was a really young kid and would go on road trips, I used to name every car brand and sometimes even model as they'd go past. You could probably even go so far as to call me obsessed, if I'm quite honest. The love for cars fed into a lot of interest in my life and is likely why I have such a fondness for mecha anime like Gundam and Zoids, for example. Putting stuff together and seeing how it works from the inside out and then putting that thing to use is such a cool thing to do, and of course is just something that comes with the territory of cars. The thing is though, obviously not everyone has had that same childhood. Hell, a lot of people probably couldn't have even given two shits about cars until they were old enough to get their license and drive them themselves. But that's okay, not everyone has to enjoy things to the same extent that I do, in the same ways that I do. And in that same way, those people that don't enjoy those things aren't posers because they don't enjoy the same things I do to the depth that I do in the way that I do. I've made 2 key videos so far. One on Initial D and the whole concept of car culture past and present and what it really means to be fast. And another on Wangan Midnight and discovering your why, the reason you like cars and even drive in the first place. Those got a little deep in some places, and rightfully so. It is a very complex topic. But there is still another avenue to look down, and that is through the lens of the beauty in cars and how a car can change your life. To go down that path, we're going to start with a far lesser known manga than any of the other series I talk about, my favorite Carrera. And we're going to see things through the perspective of Reina Todoroki. Her father recently passed, and our story starts with her siblings, and their inheritance. Our girl inherits a portion of her father's wealth that she never thought she would, and was truthfully unprepared for, only to grow into a person that can handle and appreciate the newfound outlook this opportunity gives her, which is what her father always intended for her, and why he left her what he did. A never before seen concept that the Netflix series The Gentleman would shamelessly steal 20 years later. Now that that bit's over, if it wasn't clear enough from the cover of this manga, our protagonist Reina inherited a Ruby Rose 964 Carrera RS from her late father. That, well, she doesn't really know what to do with. Hell, she doesn't even drive manual, but that's not going to stop her from learning. She's inherited this car, her dad gave it to her for a reason, and she's not just going to let it sit and continue to collect dust without finding out that very reason. So this 22-year-old manga editor is going to take a bit of a swerve in her life, introduce some novelty, and start to daily a 964, which is honestly such a fun and nostalgic journey to go down as a already established car enthusiast. Because a lot of us will tend to forget these early things and early moments you have developing your love for cars because, well, it's been so long since then. And let's be real, we take a lot of the knowledge that we've gained over the years that seems obvious to us now for granted. So seeing a character that doesn't know it all and doesn't have a chip on their shoulder but is more than willing to learn, go ahead and do exactly that, it's just awesome. The start of this manga really captures that essence of first learning how to drive manual, for example, and those moments as you drive where you're coming up to a light and you're hoping and praying it just doesn't turn red because you don't want to have to stop and start again because you don't want to stall and embarrass yourself in front of everyone on the road. Further to that point, it also captures the average learning how to drive on a highway with your parents experience that is never stressful at all, and I'm sure we all experienced. We really start with the basics in this series, as if Rain has never drove before, even though she has, but it's a whole different ballgame now. But at the end of the day, it's fun, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with starting from ground zero, especially when you're learning manual for the first time in a 964 Carrera, of all things. I mean, think about it. Not everyone knows how to left foot brake, heel toe downshift, or in Raina's case, downshift at any point at all, rather than just tackling corners all in one gear and laboring the car as you exit because she didn't realize you had to shift going in and out of corners. Because I mean, if you really think about it, yeah, if you aren't into cars, no one's really there to teach you these things. So how the hell would she know? I personally only found out about all this stuff through YouTube videos because I was so invested in cars and car culture as a teenager. And I guess technically still am, just not to that extent. But if it wasn't for YouTube and all those videos, no one would have really taught me those things. My dad taught me how to drive manual, but he was not going to teach me how to heel-toe downshift. I'm not even sure if he knows how to heel-toe downshift. He might surprise me and actually know, but he didn't freaking tell me how to do it. With all of that being said though, it doesn't really take long at all for Raina to really start enjoying and appreciating the act of driving, which was something previously she thought was kind of mundane. It only took 3 chapters, which is like about 10% of what we got, because really there are only 36 chapters currently translated. The other 90% starts with Raina starting to take some real pride and appreciation in her new Porsche, and even going so far as to, look and admire it sometimes. She's becoming one of us. She learns the fundamentals of how to wash a car, like going from top to bottom, panel at a time, but unfortunately no 2-bucket method was mentioned, so we can deduct a couple points for that. She even gets in an accident, experiences the pain of seeing her car on the back of a tow truck, and learns the consequences of driving like a bit of an idiot on public roads. We all got to learn at some point that time and place is super important. And if you don't believe that, go watch my initial D video. I'll talk about it a bit in there. Then she experiences the old sting of getting hit with your first mechanic bill, meeting some people that are way more into cars than you are, and some that might be a teensy bit pretentious about it, like Raina's cousin that we're introduced to. She also drives a Porsche, but it's a 986, and she feels that Raina doesn't deserve the 911, especially after she takes it for a quick spin herself and subsequently falls in love with it. She gets super petty about it too, telling Raina that she pities the Carrera because of how safe and boring she drives it, even going so far as to threaten to take the car from her if she can't beat her in a race in 2 months' time. But what I love so much about Raina as a character is she doesn't just give in. She doesn't do what everyone else wants of her. She doesn't dive deep into racing and learning every single thing she can and practicing toge courses 24/7. Instead, her approach is to just learn the car a little better and spend as much time as physically possible with it, because that's what she values most out of the car and that's what she wants to do. And in that time, driving around a car like the Carrera, she starts to meet more and more people. And as she does, starts to slowly admire, appreciate, and learn more about other cars outside of her Carrera. She meets owners of Ferraris, Lambos, other Porsches, a stray Dodge Viper, and even a 2000 GT. Again, each time she encounters one of these cars, it just reminds me of myself growing up, discovering and learning about all these cars I had just never heard about, and it still happens to this day. There are random little cars, especially older cars that I know nothing about, that I'll still occasionally see on like an Instagram story where it sold for like 500k at some random auction bid, and I have to go into a whole rabbit hole of what this car is about and why I've never heard of it. Out of all these encounters she's had, there is one that sticks out more than the rest though. And it's a very brief encounter with an old man who owns the 2000 GT. She just met the guy randomly at a rest stop, and because they both had cars that were a little bit different from the rest, they could easily strike up a conversation with each other. That is just the power meeting another car enthusiast has. There's a mutual understanding and shared interest automatically there between two people when you park two cars like that next to each other. But more important than that is in this chat he had with her, this old man went to validate exactly how Raina felt and told her that you don't need to push and drive a car to its fullest potential all the time to have an enjoyable experience with it. Sure, it's great sometimes, and he talks about how a car can be a reflection of its owner and how the feelings of the driver and the car can become one when, pushing the car to its limits and going really fast, which is actually something I talked a little bit about in my One Gun Midnight video. But at the end of the day, a car is also just an extension of yourself, a utility, like a part of your body, or as Raina puts it, her car is her other self. And with something that you have that deep of a connection with, it becomes irreplaceable. The old man confirms her feelings that cars aren't just for driving fast. They're a staple part of our lives, which is especially true for car enthusiasts. And then he poses a question to her, forgetting about everything her cousin thinks. Does she believe that the 964 Carrera RS is a car that suits her? She agrees that it does, and in that moment, she sees a glimpse of her own father in the old geezer and starts to finally, realize a little bit of why her father left this car to her to begin with. Now, this ideology, the one that Raina's cousin has, can be a bit of an issue in real life with car enthusiasts. We'll call them purists too. There are some people that just can't fathom you enjoying things in a different way to the way they enjoy the same things. Like hell, as an example, I rarely drive my ISF in sport mode, which I'm sure would probably piss a lot of people off. The whole why have a car with power if you aren't going to use it kind of crowd. But like honestly, fuck me, not every situation in life is a goddamn race. And I for one genuinely do enjoy cruising in glorified Camry mode. Anyway, after everything, when it comes to that race that still goes ahead, Raina ends up losing by quite a bit because, well, her cousin is actually a semi-pro driver as well, so she never stood a chance. But in defeat, she refuses to give up her 964 because it was left to her by her father, and she has grown so fond of it in this short time. And at the very least, her cousin has found a newfound appreciation for her 968 and decides to drop the whole thing. So we got the good ending. Past that, Raina gets familiar with her local Porsche scene, going on an all Porsche cruise with a bunch of others in the community, and finds out one of the best things about being in the car community. The fact that it's just nice to be in a group with a bunch of other enthusiasts, especially when they're driving a similar car that you do. My final touch point on these 36 chapters of manga we have translated is a small mini arc between two police officers, Ayumi and Mari, who are both car enthusiasts, just in different ways. Ayumi appreciates older cars and all their fun little quirks, whereas Mari doesn't really see the appeal and just thinks modern day cars are simply better. It's also really weird reading this in 2024 where a 350Z is considered a modern car. Not that they're classics or anything, but they are over 20 years old now, which means in the context of this manga and when it was written, the Celica LB Ayumi owns back then in 2005 is just about as old as the modern 350Z Mari owns is right now. So if this manga was written today instead of in 2005, the old car the cop would have could be a 350Z, or maybe more like an S15, for example. It's a little bit older and maybe it's the timeline a bit better, but still, like, that's crazy. Now this whole mini arc happens because the old school cop wants to teach the new school cop an appreciation for older cars through a neutral perspective of someone they almost gave a ticket to earlier, Raina, in her old Carrera 964, which just completely backfires on her because as soon as Mari takes a ride in the Porsche, she just completely fucking hates it. But the reason I wanted to bring it up and why I find it to be so interesting is because she makes a really great, albeit maybe a little controversial, point. Her ride in the Porsche was uncomfortable, and it was so damn loud in the cabin that she couldn't even have a conversation. So, because of those things, she hated it. And that is a perfectly valid perspective to have. I've said this already, but this part, this little arc in particular, really goes to emphasize that some people just want different things out of their cars. They still love cars, but maybe they don't want the rawest driving experience possible. And not wanting that doesn't make you any less of a car enthusiast. Maybe you love cars, but what you want is to travel and see the world with your car. Take it all over, an adventure with your friends or your significant other. That's much easier and honestly better to do in a car that's built for touring. Or even something like a four-wheel drive so you can go off the beaten trail, but I don't have to sit here and advocate for that when a channel like four-wheel drive 24/7 exists. That's a whole different aspect of car culture I've never really talked about though. But it is one I have a whole lot of mates that are into. Because I mean, who doesn't have a fucking ute in Australia? And I mean, when it's a sweet, sweet tax write-off for your building company, why wouldn't you put a 3-inch lift, canopy, 35s, and a bull bar on your brand spanking new Ford Ranger? Anyway, don't get me wrong. I loved cars like my Hawkeye that I owned for 8 years, but it was kind of cheap with a lot of rattles and lowered and not well insulated. Plus I also had a 2.5-inch catback with a cannon on the back that was droney as all hell on the highway, which yes is my fault, but I also did that when I was 17 and just wanted loud. But I am a changed man now. See, all that stuff I mentioned was fine for short trips, you can handle it. But if you actually wanted to go on a road trip, or let's be real, the highway in general, with all the wind noise in the cabin, only having 5 gears, so you're at about 3,000 RPMs the whole way, with that loud exhaust droning, I can barely hear myself think, let alone have a conversation with whoever happens to be sitting in my passenger seat. My F, on the other hand, is a hell of a lot better for touring. Sure, it guzzles fuel and is only a year newer than my Hawkeye was, but it is a luxury car that was the top of its range 16 years ago, which does sound like a long time, but it truly holds up. It is so damn smooth and comfortable and far better insulated than the fucking Subaru. I get no road noise. I chill in 8th gear on the highway, hearing no drone. And when I want to have fun, I can drop it down to 4th or 3rd and just gun it. I've got the power there. It might not feel quite as raw to drive as the Subaru, and you do miss that whole illusion of speed, where going 80, for example, feels so damn fast compared to going 80 feeling quite slow in a more solid car like the F. Mainly because of how safe and smooth it feels by comparison. So if you do want to feel that same rush of going fast, you kind of just have to go faster, but I don't really chase that feeling a lot anymore. Don't get me wrong, like most people, I still enjoy going fast, but 99% of my time behind the wheel is just spent cruising around, going to the gym, going to the shops, maybe going to see family on a little road trip or somewhere else for lunch with the missus. And when I'm driving like a grandpa anyway, I'd rather just do it in comfort. Plus, there really is something to be said about knowing you've got some power under the hood, but just choosing not to use it. I don't know, calm your fucking tits. I know I'm not driving a 1,000 horsepower supercar. I'm not trying to claim that I've got the fastest car in the damn world, but you get what I mean. And if you don't, you need to go and watch my initial D video. So like I said, this manga only has 36 chapters translated. And this is pretty much a TLDR of the journey we got from that. A short but deep fall into car culture and how 1964 completely flipped a young girl's life upside down. In these chapters, she's already gone from knowing little to nothing about cars to developing a real bond with her Carrera, finding the joy in car culture and the act of driving itself. And as a bonus, met so many cool different people all because of driving that car. Which is why I consider it such a great example for my point. The 911 really opened up so many doors for her that likely would have remained closed otherwise, and made her a part of something she never would have seen or even thought about before. All because people started looking at her a little bit differently since she started driving a 911 Carrera. It's a weird phenomenon, but I do see it all the time. When people get cool cars that develop that little bit of envy from others, they get a little bit of clout with it, especially from other car enthusiasts. And if you get a real enthusiast car, people will start to take notice. And that can then go to build you a lot of real life connections because a lot of people have that shared interest. Hell, I know a guy that used to be in a Subaru club I was in that ended up buying an R34 GTR just before they became ridiculously expensive. He then built that thing with no expenses spared. He had every single Nismo and Z-Tune part you could imagine. And then he essentially used it as a marketing funnel for his detailing business that's doing so damn well right now. Cars can genuinely be such a powerful thing, and people's love for them really does run deep. Having a car that people like can build trust and even respect from others, and obviously that can lead to business decisions like what my mate did. And also like we see a lot of car YouTubers do, but we'll touch on them a little later. Now, back to Carrera. As much as I can appreciate the direction this manga was going, and did get some genuine value from the messaging in it, I can't sit here and say that I recommend you reading it. Just on a personal level. You see, there is a really glaring issue that pokes its head quite often throughout this manga. And I've deliberately left it out of conversation up until this point because it honestly kind of ruins it for me. Which is just the sheer level of horniness, and I wouldn't say it's glorification, but it's that whole early 2000s downplay of sexual harassment as a joke, which is ever present in this manga. And it's just not funny, is it? It's one thing if, okay, maybe it just happens once and maybe we can excuse it as a product of its time. There are so many great pieces of media that are guilty of fan service or just being problematic in general, but are still considered great pieces of media. Because we're on manga, my mind immediately goes to Naruto and Jiraiya as a character and all the shenanigans he got up to.
And do you know how old
Naruto
is?
She's 14.
14.
Mm-hmm.
Which gets pretty yikes, but that isn't the whole story by any stretch of the imagination. But in this manga, it just really doesn't stop. You'll see the same jokes about Reina's body over and over again. And it really just starts to play into that icky weeb stereotype that I hate so much. I even went back to check, and in 20 of the 36 translated chapters, there is some sort of joke unnecessarily sexualizing our MC. And then at least 8 of those instances would likely be considered sexual harassment. It's a shame because I really think Reina is an interesting MC. She's been written quite well and there's a really nice perspective to see there, and I'm sure the rest of the manga probably has that. But when it's paired with so much junk every other chapter, it just weighs the whole thing down. I mean, this isn't even a manga you could really read in public. Like, for fuck's sake, you're allowed to have a girl as your MC without motherfuckers harassing her every single chapter as a damn joke. Or just gawking like, oh guys, if they have never fucking seen a woman in their life. Come on, man. It's fucking cringe at best and just happens so much in this manga that it completely put me off. At the very least, it seems to be quite heavily front-loaded, as we don't really get any chapters that have problematic moments past chapter 30. So perhaps it was just something done in the first volume to try and promote and sell it. I've got no idea, but at this point, I'm not really willing to keep reading it, I'm afraid. It is being ongoingly translated again very slowly, so if you're interested, by all means, but I can't say I recommend it. But now we're going to leave all that negativity behind, alright? Fuck that off and move on to a manga that not only illustrates my point better, but also generally respects women a lot better too. And that manga is Countach, the definitive story of how a car can change your life. We start with our protagonist, Shun Sorayama, a 34-year-old down on his luck. He's stuck in a dead-end job, never had a relationship that's really lasted, and his most recent one just ended with a girl that left him for some dude in a Ferrari. It is rough out there for your boy. After receiving a letter from himself written 25 years in the past for some school time capsule for yourself kind of project, it really hits him that his life didn't turn out anything like he thought it would. He always loved cars. He even had an MR2 that he fucked with in his 20s, but he's since given that up and relinquished himself to just working for the past decade, only to look around now and realize he's got nothing to show for all that work. Not even a damn condo that he can call his own. At his lowest point, crying alone on his bedroom floor, he says, fuck it. If nothing else, our boy is going to achieve his one biggest dream he had in that very letter from when he was a kid, by scraping every dollar he can together to somehow, some way, buy his all-time dream car, the Lamborghini Countach LP 400. Which, unfortunately, was way further out of reach than he first thought. Because, well, there were only 150 of them manufactured and out there in the world. But he wants to achieve his dream, and he's not settling for second best. If he's committing to a Countach, he's getting that LP400, not just some unlimited model. Then, one night, a little while later, while doom scrolling the web, he happens upon a website that is pretty much a raffle to get the opportunity to buy an LP400 Countach that is located in Japan. Something Mr. Beast would likely shamelessly steal in a few years from now if everything going on at the moment blows over. At first, it kind of looks like a scam, but really, all Shun needs to do is submit his reason for wanting to purchase this Countach and be the one chosen out of already over 41,000 people that have also done the same thing. So I mean, what's he got to lose? And of course, because we're reading this manga about his story, our boy is absolutely rewarded. The next morning he gets an email and, well, he's the one that's been chosen. But he does need to show that letter he sent himself 25 years ago as proof of his story, which he does. And after that, he is shown the near mint condition Tenebrae Black LP 400 Countach. But as for the price, well, it's 1.7 billion yen. Supposedly the same price as it was retail when the old man selling it first bought it years ago. Not even adjusted for modern inflation. And the catch is this man is requesting that money within a week. Now boy Shun only has 2.5 million yen to his name. However, Shun, as the absolute coat that he is, stands on business, refuses to abandon his dream, and says he'll find a way to come up with that money within the week. Fortunately enough for him though, he won't need to sell his soul or his body to get that money, because my guy is just absolutely rewarded once again. He is racking up W's. This was all just a test. He's clearly passionate about this car and is not just some collector that's looking to resell it later down the line for a profit. He is a pure-blooded, sparkly-eyed car enthusiast. So our old man grants him his wish and gives him the Countach for that 2.5 million yen he had saved. In part because of what I mentioned a second ago on the whole test thing, and also likely in part because the old geezer simply just resonated so much with his story. Plus, it's probably a whole thing about he's gonna die soon and he can't take his money with him, so he values experiences more than dollars and wanted to grant some young blokes one wish. Because fuck it. Might as well change people's lives rather than hoarding your wealth. Just for some perspective, Shun is getting this car, adjusted for inflation, for approximately 30,000 American dollars in today's money. For a car that's worth easily over $1 million in today's money. He might as well have just fucking stole the thing. And does he ever drive it like he stole it? Our boy takes a seat and falls in love. They say don't meet your heroes, but this man did, and it fucking paid off. He then decides no matter what, no matter how expensive it gets, no matter what he needs to do, he will own and drive this car forever. And on his first drive, he runs into none other than the Ferrari guy that stole his girl earlier. And of course, what else would he do but smoke his ass? All of this, mind you, takes place in one of the longest but fucking coolest first introductory chapters I've probably ever read. But if that doesn't get you pumped to see what happens next, Chapter 2 has my man drifting on the highway going 190 to avoid getting a speeding ticket, while subsequently angling himself so the guy in the Ferrari passes him and gets flashed by the camera and ends up with a speeding ticket instead. What a fucking Chad. And yes, before you say it, this manga is unrealistic as fuck. Yes, this is basically a car power fantasy. I'd almost go so far as to say it's the car version of what Yakuza is for RPG brawlers. It's super dramatized, over the top, and dumb as fuck at times, but it's fun as fuck, and our boy has the wildest plot armor, the craziest driving feats, and at first no game, but once he gets that Countach, oh, does he ever pull tremendously. And I'm not even talking about pulling on the manga when he's driving. This man pulls. He's got the most W fucking riz and a statement piece of a car to boot. Plus, my man respects women and goes so far as to save a girl's cat after being thrown out of a car by drifting, opening his door, and scooping it up. I have never seen a manga panel harder than that. That all just comes together to make one of the coolest manga experiences I've ever had, all centered around one of the coolest supercars of all time. I could honestly say I enjoyed Countach just as much, if not more, than both Initial D and Wangan Midnight. And sure, I think that might be a little bit because of recency bias, but also just because the story follows characters that are a little bit older and actually more relatable to me than either of those two. Sure, Shun is a decade older than I am, but I find a lot of his story far more relatable than Takumi's, for example. Because for me, well, it's been 8 years since I've been in high school, so I am pretty damn far removed from that at this point, and well, no one's going back in time, so I'm in a much more prime position in my life to relate to the 34-year-old than I am the 18-year-old. Having a couple drinks and chatting shit about cars with my mates, that is far more up my alley. And I mean, come on, we even get so specifically relatable with interactions like the old catching up with a friend you haven't seen in a while and going through the routine 3 stable questions. Are you married? What do you do for work? And what do you drive now? On top of that, the experience of sharing cars and the enjoyment of them with your friends is exactly the kind of shit I relate to. And is more universal in age, to be fair. But I guess the older you get, the more disposable income you typically have and the cooler cars you typically are able to afford. I remember vividly the day I first came home with my ISF. And the first thing I did without even telling him was just taking it over to my best mate's place to surprise him and show him and give him a whirl and let him drive it. It was just so fun sharing that experience. It's one thing to have a cool car, but sharing that experience with others, nothing can top that. Besides one thing, I guess, that can probably top that, which are the doors only a car like the Countach, for example, can open for you. And more than anything, that is the way this car changes Shun's life the most. When he drives, he is noticed. And not in a silly, overly loud Lancer roll your eyes at as they go past kind of noticed. Everyone knows what the Countach is, and if they don't, it's got more than enough road presence for people to realize there's clearly something special about this car. It gives him a level of clout that just gets him places. Sure, he's still got the same job, but he's happier. He reignites his passion for cars. He reignites old friendships, and he creates a bunch of new relationships with very influential people that probably never would have looked twice at him otherwise. Like, for example, his landlord, who he even went to help grieve in a really small but beautiful mini arc about the landlord, his son, and an old Ferrari. That's the power a car can have, which is far greater than anything you will ever find on a dyno sheet. He also meets Satome through the Countach. She's the rich guy's secretary, gives Shun the lowdown when he first gets into it, and then becomes a recurring character, helping him a bunch along the way. She also becomes his primary love interest and is actually a really badass character in her own right. She seriously knows her shit and is a great wealth of knowledge to impart onto Shun throughout this journey, and has an abundance of contacts in her arsenal, just like the very underrated but amazing supercar mechanic Tora, who is, well, apparently what Europe does to a motherfucker according to Japan. He's also quite the Chad in his own right, helping Shun achieve their shared dream of taking the Countach over 300 kilometers per hour. We also get the Corvette driving, pole dancing dynamite girl Yuri, who's, to be honest, a bit of a fuckwit at first, racing like an absolute asshole, causing a lot of people to, well, crash on the toge by just doing burnouts around corners and creating smoke. All until she's absolutely humbled by our boy. And then has another mini arc with him later where the two of them rightfully fuck up a predator. She's a little forward and inappropriate herself, but it is nothing as yuck as what we saw in Carrera. Outside of one time, she literally grabs my guy by the balls. That's not okay. All of these relationships he makes stems from one thing, which obviously is the Countach. And I'm sure there are also many more connections Shun makes throughout the manga, but at this stage, only 96 chapters of it are translated. So for now, we'll never really know unless you want to just look at the pictures and read the rest of the manga without context. But even then, I don't think it's on any manga sites that I know of, so maybe you just can't. Good luck. I mean, just from the volume covers alone as context, it looks to me like he continues pulling, has a beach episode, goes into a rally maybe, starts racing a little bit more on tracks and tries to go vertical. Maybe has a little bit of time enjoying the quiet life with his Countach, taking it to space, and then eventually dismantling the whole thing for some sort of art exhibit, and then ending with the memories he made along the way. But at the very least, translation is still, albeit slowly, going ahead. So maybe one day we will have all 289 chapters translated and we can appreciate this manga in its full glory, and hopefully it doesn't fall off a cliff and get shit and actually is great the whole way through. I didn't want to spoil too much about this manga outside of the premise and a few key details that will really help illustrate my point. Because honestly, it is quite the hidden gem, and I really think it is better to be read than to be explained at you while you're doing who fucking knows what. What are you doing? Homework, actual work, mowing the lawn, cleaning, making breakfast, brushing your teeth, whatever the fuck you're doing while you listen to this. I think this manga deserves your actual attention. So definitely go do that, but before you do, we're not done here yet. To delve into a little deeper on how a car can really change your life, I wanted to point out how this manga really just reminded me of YouTuber TheStradman's journey. Now, to be perfectly honest with you, I know little to nothing about this guy besides like one video I saw of him featured on a podcast where he goes to explain the journey of how he got to where he is now. And I mean, he seems like an alright dude, but if he is a shit, sorry in advance. I just find his story really interesting because you see, his story is a very extreme example, but a real life example of how one car can dramatically alter your life. And for him, it was through one Lamborghini Gallardo. He made a wild financial decision to purchase a Gallardo on a pretty modest salary, to be honest. I know good old Mr. Dave Ramsey would chew his ear off for that decision, but for him, it worked. Because after making that purchase, shortly after, he made a video titled Lamborghini at age 26. What I do to be able to afford a Lamborghini Gallardo. Which is a mouthful of a title, but fuck if it didn't work for him. One day, he was just a car spotter with, he was getting a bit of success on YouTube, but relatively no one knew who he was. And the next day, every young car enthusiast wanted to be him. Besides me, for some reason, I never fucking heard of the guy till now. Plus, after getting 4 million views on that one video and making a quick 10k, this just really went to motivate him to pursue his dream of taking YouTube seriously further. And after the company he worked for went bankrupt, he did just that. He took a risk, a really damn crazy risk, and it paid dividends on dividends, all because of the clout that one car got him and all of the inevitable connections that would have spawned from that purchase. And if Countach was set in 2024, I'm sure that is exactly what our boy Shun would have done as well. Because I mean, who wouldn't? You get a once in a lifetime, life-changing opportunity that floats your way, as if you wouldn't try your best to capitalize on that. I could already imagine the YouTube titles. I paid how much for this Countach? Or billionaire basically gives me this Lamborghini Countach, or the $30,000 Lamborghini Countach of my dreams, some shit like that. Maybe that's all I gotta do. Do you reckon if I sell my house and buy a 997 GT3 somehow without getting divorced in the process, do you think I could make videos on it that you all would watch so much that it would allow me to make a living off this channel? Nah, obviously not. Unless. Nah. Unless. Nah. Unless. Nah. It's okay, so these are pretty over-the-top examples, right? Let's be real. The vast majority of us aren't going to be in the position to be able to buy a supercar in our 20s. I mean, hell, some people aren't even in the position to buy a car at all in their 20s. And while stories like TheStradman's are cool, and all credit to him, he clearly worked hard to get where he is, thinking that you could just up and change the entire trajectory of your life by doing exactly what he did and going to an insane amount of debt is a product of survivorship bias. There are probably so many people you've never in your life heard of that have tried to do similar things and just failed. I mean, why wouldn't every rich kid's son or daughter try and do the exact same thing? And there are many rich people over the world with some crazy nepo babies. Where are all they at? I do believe to an extent there is some form of intrinsic motivation having a car you can barely afford has on you, because it forces you to work harder and really just motivates you to somehow subsidize it. But that is a very, very thin line to walk, because that debt can ruin your life just as much, if not more, than the car does motivate you to get up in the morning. Not that I want to discourage you. If you want to risk it all and bet everything on black for the chance that it pays off, that's your prerogative, man. But just don't get the wrong idea with the message I'm trying to portray here. I do believe a car can change your life, and I've seen it happen. And it's a beautiful thing that these hunks of metal can mean so much to us and bring so much of us from all different walks of life together in so many different ways. But I don't believe it's a given that it's going to change your life. And it's not always going to be such a dramatic shift like TheStradman, for example. And that's okay. Hell, this very manga I've found such a fondness for, at least to where we're up to in the chapters that are translated, Shun's life hasn't changed all that much. He still works his same job, he still connects with a bunch of his old friends. It's just that his outlook has changed, and he's been able to make so many great connections, which I think is the most important part and the real key takeaway from this video. Cars are more than something that just gets you from A to B. I truly believe that. Cars have their own soul that attracts each and every one of us to them. It sounds kind of cringe to say out loud, but there really is a reason we love the cars that we do, and a reason we share that love with so many others, and the reason it's just so easy to talk with another car enthusiast. You could have absolutely nothing else in common, like me and my boss, for example. We're extremely different people and have like a 40-year age gap between us. But when it comes to the topic of cars, you better believe we could talk about that for hours on end without it ever getting exhausting. Which, like I was saying earlier, in Carrera's case, is what makes car clubs so damn cool to be a part of. Like, you get to be in your own little club. You're in a subsection of what already is a subculture. The Subaru club I was in as a teenager was pretty alright. And the Lexus F community? I mean, yeah, sometimes they can come off a little elitist. With some of these guys, it is Tom's racing parts or nothing. But overall, they really have been awesome so long as I've been a part of the community. Everyone's really great, and there's a whole wealth of knowledge throughout all of these people in the community. Plus, they have great relationships with mechanics and Lexus dealers, so it's so easy for you to find someone you can trust because you have so many other people for your reference for it, which is just such an awesome thing because, man, do some mechanics ever fucking suck? Not all of you though, there are some mint mechanics out there, believe me. You just gotta really look for them. I really, truly do love it. And the fact is, if I ever have a question or concern, I have a whole wealth of knowledge to look to. And that is just the sense of community you can get with certain niche cars like the Lexus F cars, which is something you simply don't get anywhere else. I found this really interesting video I highly recommend you check out of this old guy who's owned a NSX for over 20 years. And the video just encapsulates everything I've been talking about. Because his biggest takeaway in those decades of ownership was the love he had for all the NSX group events he went to, which at first he only went to because of the car, but then he found himself staying and going many times with his wife, all because of the people.
It's the people that really keep you connected. You make the connection because of the car. You maintain the connection because of the personas, the humanity, the camaraderie, the esprit de corps. All of these things have a common thread throughout the car hobby, really for all marques. For me, it was the NSX.
Unironically, in the end, what is better than any car, and one way that I can almost guarantee cars will tangibly change your life for the better, is the friends we make along the way.